is I just want to introduce you to Laura. Now, I met Laura via the Out from the Mist competition, and we touched base online. And I just wanted to say that she has taught me so much in the last couple of weeks of me knowing her. And I think she is just a bundle of knowledge, but also her tenacity, to speak up for those who don't have a voice yet or don't even know that it exists, has been amazing. So Laura's received a late diagnosis of autism and ADHD, and she is also a parent of an autistic man. All I can say is that she has empowered me to do so much more than I'm currently doing. And her passion and her enthusiasm about equity, diversity, and inclusion speaks, to none. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Laura.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm just going to share screen. So I would like to acknowledge, it's covering up there, the traditional owners and Torres Strait Island people as the traditional custodians of the land in Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. I pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge the stories, traditions and living cultures of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and commit to fostering a culture of learning from and working with First Nations peoples in the spirit of reconciliation and access to justice. I live and work on Quandamooka country, whose sovereignty has never been ceded. Now, I did mess up the first sentence because it's covered with the bar. Anyway, moving on. Thank you, Zoe and Donna, from Finding North for today's opportunity. I wanted to first of all share a little bit about me. Now, I haven't put here that I am a mother or a wife or a daughter. They're all, personal and very important things about me, but this is me sharing about my lived experience. Now, one thing I want to point out is the artwork on there is mine, and in each slide it's slowly disappearing off the screen, because that's how I feel if I don't get the correct supports and accommodations, and I feel like I'm disappearing as well. So it's kind of a little bit symbolic. So I am creative, being an artist. I'm compassionate, I'm curious, and I am determined. I'm very determined. One day I would love to talk about the process I've gone through for advocacy around bullying in schools, but you'll need a few hours and maybe some champagne. So, some fun facts. I was an anxious child and I grew into an anxious adult. As a child, I experienced some early childhood trauma due to my father's father. And it took a long time to really manifest in my life. I have been diagnosed with postnatal depression after my firstborn. Then, of course, complex PTSD, depression, global anxiety disorder, and then finally late autism and ADHD. Now, I actually believe that I don't have depression at all. I believe that diagnosis, which is a 10-year-old diagnosis, is a result of burnout from masking my whole life and not knowing and realizing that I was autistic and also ADHD, and feeling things that I'll talk about in a further slide. When I did get my diagnosis 2 years ago, so around the age of 50, I spent far too much time wondering about what would have happened had I received the right diagnosis earlier in my life. And while this is something that you can't avoid thinking about, it isn't productive because you can't change anything. And I did have, a lot of clarification and a lot of aha moments around, oh, so that's why that happened. And, that's why every time something happens on a social situation, I ring my mum or my husband, and, you have to almost debrief the whole situation to understand what goes on. But primarily, I believe that I am not depressed. I do have burnout at times, but that is related to autism and ADHD. Okay, so the collateral damage. Now, I do try and, just to let you know, I do try and balance when I'm talking, not just doom and gloom stuff. So I do have good stuff coming up. So just hang tight. But the collateral damage in my time, in my life. So 10 years ago, I had quite a few admissions in a psychiatric hospital, and I had electroconvulsive treatment because my psychiatrist was bewildered at why I wasn't responding to other traditional therapies. Now, that ECT was treating an incorrect diagnosis of depression, but it did leave me with a permanent short-term memory impairment. And this permanent short-term memory impairment means that there are times when I'm speaking and I can't remember certain words, and I'm like, that word, and it's quite embarrassing. But I just have become more and more okay with saying to people that, I have a short-term memory impairment, and I'm very sorry, but this is one of the results of it. So I've gone through a lifetime of self-blame for all the things I thought were wrong with me, as opposed to celebrating my neurodivergence. If anyone doesn't understand the terminology of neurodivergent, there's neurodiversity, which is just talking about all different neurotypes. And then there's neurodivergent people, who, and I am definitely going to miss people, I think, but generally it's autistic, ADHD, epileptic, have Tourette's, have dyslexia, dysgraphia, and another multitude of, neurological things going on. And it's us saying that they're not disorders, they're nothing wrong with us. It is just the way our brain operates. And usually we're pretty good at workarounds too on dealing with how our brain operates. So I feel like I've had many missed opportunities in my life that I can't regain. Again, it's not a helpful thing to mull over for very long, but I think it should be, just mentioned. And I'm starting to really feel, so there's a medical model and a social model around disability, and the social model of disability is the model that disabled people claim, and that is that there is nothing wrong with them being disabled. What is the barriers is what's not provided in their life or the accommodations given. Like for instance, we've just got scooters in our area, e-scooters, 130 odd, and I noticed that a lot of them are parked on the middle of footpaths, which make footpaths inaccessible for wheelchair users. So no, I haven't got out of my car and removed one of them, because I have also read that if you touch them without registering with your credit card, it makes a really loud beeping noise. So I'm paranoid about that. So yes, this I believe this social model for people with psychosocial disabilities is very important as well. I feel that there is a power imbalance, a massive power imbalance, when we are trying to navigate a healthcare system that is all about you know, clinicians who don't really have a reputation of listening to people who have any kind of mental health ongoing issues. I don't like the word disorder, by the way. So yeah, that's just some of the collateral damage that I feel I've faced. Not to forget also that there is that nasty word stigma, and that is always an ongoing battle to try and educate and inform people around mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, chronic mental conditions, etc. Okay, I like to talk about living and thriving with a mental illness because I believe I do that really well. I work really hard on trying to maintain a stable mental health. Sometimes I don't succeed, but I am a lot better at taking care of myself than I used to be. So I will rest at home. I know that I can get through adversity and discomfort because I always have. So I have a lot more confidence in myself, in my ability to sit in discomfort. And that's an acceptance and commitment therapy kind of tool in your toolbox. And while I can't give advice, I'm not qualified to give advice, I'm just sharing my lived experience. I recommend that you have a toolbox, you know, a virtual toolbox of different things you can pick up and think, well, I might try mindfulness, or today I'm feeling quite, you know, an element of discomfort, but I'm just going to allow myself to experience this discomfort, knowing that tomorrow I will feel differently. So there's loads of different things you can put in your toolbox, and it's really best that you speak to your team of treating clinicians and professionals to work out what's best for you. So what have I achieved? I've achieved a lot. This is just a few things. So TEDx Brisbane 2018, I stood on the red circle and gave a 1-minute pitch. So I wasn't on the program, but you had to apply for it, and you found out 2 days before that you were successful, and you were given a minute, and you weren't allowed to promote a business. And so I talked about inclusion, and the hardest thing about that was keeping it to a minute, because they made it very clear you could not go over that minute. Trying to get a message across when you know you're talking to a lot of professional speakers, where you have, you know, a beginning, a middle, and end in a minute is just, oh my gosh, really hard. But I did it. I've helped set my autistic son up with his own business. He wasn't able to get a job while he was in school. He looked for about 2 years, and while he was in school, we started him with a part-time business, which he's now been out of school for 2 years, and it's evolved into a full-time business, and it's also evolved and offered more services. And my son is 19, nearly 20, and he's in charge of his life. He's driving his life. He has he does everything he wants to do, and if it is something he wants to do and he needs help, we find the way to support him, to help him do it. So I've had a lot of public speaking presentations. I've spoken in Parliament House in Canberra, and that was at the launch of the see, here goes my short-term memory impairment, Parliamentary Friends of Autism group. And the reason I was asked to speak by Senator Holly Hughes is because I initially raised the idea of the group with my local federal member, Ros Vasta, and then it took probably about 18 months to come to fruition, because there was an election in between that time. I've also addressed the Senate Select Committee on Autism. That was earlier this year, and my son stood beside me and also had his say. I mean, both Clay and I have had, well, particularly Clay, a lot of media attention, which is not fun. It's quite intrusive, but it does really give you the opportunity to talk about the very real importance of employing people with disabilities, particularly autistic people, because autistic people's unemployment and their unemployment rate overall is much higher on average than a disabled person's unemployment rate. I've consulted on some NDIS projects. The most recent one is a training video that's currently online on the NDIS website for service providers and support workers to learn about communication, because just because you don't speak doesn't mean you can't communicate, and it goes through all different ways to set people up for success. I'm currently a member of Autism Queensland Advisory Committee. I'm an emerging artist, and I've been advocating for 17 years. I started when my son was 2, and at first it was primarily around early intervention that we felt was necessary for him, avoiding ABA, which is a very political topic in the autism sector. But yeah, as he grew older and I started to see other autistic children and also become friends with other autistic adults, it was not just advocating for him, it was advocating for autistic people in general. And then, you know, finally realizing that I'm autistic and getting the diagnosis really helped. I would have to say that there was no sadness around that. There was just a great element of joy and celebrating. So yeah, I do have some good connections, and I am well respected, and I've worked really hard for that. So I think it's always really important when you are speaking to talk about what your call to action would be. Now, firstly, I really thoroughly believe in person-centered care. Person-centered care is something that I have not received, and I am quite jaded and cynical about the current care I have. And it's not an easy process to make changes. So this includes ongoing communication between your multidisciplinary teams. Why do I write this? Okay, so I have, you know, access to a mental health nurse outreach service who comes to my home. I see my psychiatrist, and then I also talk to his practice manager. Those 3 people don't talk to each other. So I feel like I have to say the same thing 3 times to ensure there is consistency with my care. And that is really frustrating. I think that there should be some kind of case management involved so that I'm not the one doing their work for them. I'd like to see affordable, quality access to holistic mental health treatment for all. And that's because I have the privilege of affording private health, and I can access, you know, a hospital for admissions and things like that, where I'm treated reasonably well. Now, let me say, it's still not perfect. It's not ideal. There's gaps. There's things I could love to see change. But when you compare it to the public system, well, there's no comparison. And I get really distressed hearing about experiences in the public health system with not enough beds being available and people being sent home too soon, and just you know, really young people being put in with violent, unwell people. And yeah, it's just it's a very distressing thing. Media. The media is an absolute shit show with regards to the way they report around anything to do with mental illness. I would like to see across the board ongoing training for media so that they provide responsible reporting to continue fighting the stigma rather than creating clickbait division. For example, they will talk about someone who committed murder, and they will talk about the possibility that the person was autistic, or the arsonist was autistic, or this person suicided. Sorry, they don't say that. But they had mental health issues, and the police were involved, and it wasn't a very good outcome. And yeah, these are things that can be talked about in a much better way. And all it does is it makes people scared, continue to be scared of people with mental illnesses. In the majority, and Penny would be able to, she's so good with statistics and links and stuff like that, but in the majority, autistic people and people with mental illness are the victims of crime. We are not the ones perpetuating the crime. And I have a real fear around that, particularly for my son. Like I've said to my son, he's 19 and he's quite tall, but he is a really placid. He's a rules follower. If the police started yelling at him, it terrifies me, because any kind of yelling communication with him, he just can't process what's being said. And I've said to my son, if you're in a situation where police are yelling at you, just sit on the ground and put your hands in the air, because I don't know how else to keep him safe. Okay, so remove the Remove the pathological and medical approach. Why? Okay, so the hospital I stay in is such a clinical, horrible, cold place. Now, there's no operations, there's no surgical procedures, there is no need for it to be that way. Providing a place that has more soft comfort, furnishings and comfortable places, and making it more of a home environment, it would be great. The medical approach, this is the only experience, I can think of at the moment to share with you. But last year when I first started taking medication for ADHD, I was a patient at this hospital, and they called my medication a dangerous drug. And that absolutely made me furious, because you see, you already think so many bad things about yourself. You don't need that additional, pile on from the professionals who are supposed to be looking after you. And I said to the medication nurses, please don't call it that. It's a medication. It makes my brain function better. And they said, oh, well, that's just what it's always been called. And I just said, well, just because it's always been called that doesn't mean you can't change it to something else, because it still is a medication. I'm not asking you to call it lollies or anything. These little things and these little steps, they really matter and they are really important. So change the language and open it up. I went to a consumer group meeting at the hospital once, and all the people there were either people with lived experience apart from a staff member maybe, and some patients. I was a patient at the time, and I could just tell that this was a process that did not achieve anything. It felt really disingenuous. I forgot to say, by the way, down the bottom of my slides is my Instagram account name, if you want to follow me at all. Be prepared for, look, I like to say it how it is sometimes. Let's see. So again, I can't see. What is it? We have something with lived experience. Oh, so I think with conferences and public speaking opportunities, and even ambassadors to the likes of Beyond Blue and Sane and all those people, Open Minds, they should not just be held by people who are just famous people. And yes, famous people do have mental health issues, but they're unrelatable for a lot of us. So, and also with conferences and public speaking events, I think that there should be a lot more representation from us with the lived experience. Not just the carers, not our family members, because there actually will be conflict involved there, and not our clinical team, of course. The disability sector has a cry to arms, which is nothing about us without us, and I think that should really be something that we should take on as well. I'm sure that nobody would mind. The power imbalance with our clinicians must end, and there is a power imbalance. You know, my psychiatrist is just the most difficult, inflexible person, and you have this fear about being ditched by your psychiatrist and not being able to find another one, and it's not just something I know I feel. It's something that I talk to about with my friends as well. So we want to have involvement with our treatment and education with our medication. And a friend of mine was telling me yesterday that she was put on a medication a year ago, and this medication, she has found out that if you want to wean yourself off it, it's a very, very difficult process, and it can take up to 5 years. And I just thought, well, if you're going to be put on a medication like that, you should be told up front, this is what's going to happen with this medication. It's a very difficult medication to wean off. I remember I was on a medication, and when I weaned off it, I was incredibly unwell. I wasn't told about that as a side effect when I was first put on it. So from an individual perspective, all of us who sometimes may need a little bit of a crutch and may need stay in hospital or take the measures we take to keep ourselves well, we are contributing members of society, and we will lose ourselves and we will lose our identity if we are not driving our treatment. So we must keep that power imbalance at bay, and we must be fully immersed in all the decisions around our care and be at the centre of all our treatments with person-centred care. And that is it. I'm done. So hook me up with some questions.
Oh, wonderful. Of course, here I am. I'm talking for the last 2 minutes, or actually 30 seconds, and I'm doing the typical thing. I just want to say a big thank you for sharing your story, Laura. I can't thank you enough, for everything that you do and everything that you've shared on the network and all the advocacy that you do as well. So I just want to say Finding My North series is really about individuals and persons with lived experience to share their own stories and how they found their north. In this case, Laura has wonderfully shared her north, and it's how she advocates for her and her son, her wonderful art, and how she continuously to do so. So if you guys are ever interested, please feel free to let us know, and I will stop recording now for questions.